Hello everybody, and thank you for coming to today's session. My name that has already generated interest is Dr. Kirsi Cobb. So the name is Kirsi, not Kirsti, as I tell all my students. If you call me Kirsti, I will kill you. So, nice and easy to remember. I'm originally from Finland, hence the slightly weird first name. But then I got sick and tired of spelling my very long Finnish maiden name, so I just found a guy who had a really short surname. And ta-da! Now instead of it being like 50,000 letters, it is just Cobb, Kirsi Cobb. And I've been here at Cliff College now, Ben beats me by a year. I joined in 2013. And I teach mainly here Old Testament studies and gender studies, hence the topic of today's session. Now, I understand that when we are talking about stuff like this, when good people do bad things, I'm just going to give a very generic content warning here that I am going to be talking about upsetting things, among others rape. So I would just say do whatever you need to do to look after yourself. If you need to leave your screen, if you need to leave the room, if you need to talk to someone, that is absolutely fine. No offense will be taken, but just look after yourselves during this. So let's start with a brief prayer and go from there. So Lord, we thank you for this time we have together. Thank you, Lord, that we can be here at festival. Lord, I ask that as we look at your word, help us to understand what is actually going on here. What is it that you are telling us to do, asking us to do, advising us to do, warning us against, and help us to help others. In Jesus' name I ask, amen. And let all the tech work nicely too, so that Dan doesn't get grey hair. Amen to that as well. Right, so we are looking at the topic when good people do bad things. And this is something that is quite close to my heart in the sense that I am a big advocate for gender justice. And sometimes when I'm teaching classes on gender, people can make the sad assumption that all the problems are out there. We are nice people, we're Christian people, we're holy people even. So none of the issues out there could possibly exist in here. But today's story is an example of the fact that this problem exists within our own midst. Any forms of injustice, whether it's abuse or something else, they live inside the church as well as outside of it. So we would be wise to be aware of that. So Dan, you told me how to do this. Work in Jesus' name. Yes! Okay, so the story of Abraham is not in this picture, but we have got Sarah here and Hagar, Sarah on the left and Hagar on the right. And this is now a story that, shall we just say, has become a bit infamous. The story of an Egyptian slave girl that is living in the household of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham is often known, as I think it said in the blurb, as the father of faith, both in the Old and the New Testament. And then we have Sarah, the great matriarch, mother of Isaac, the son promised, and all of that. But then there is also Hagar. And shall I just say, I feel sorry for this girl, because she has often got quite a bad rep, the kind of, it was a mistake, how could Abraham, and we sometimes forget that, she's a person with a name who had no say in anything that happened to her. So when it comes to Hagar, and this comes from Phyllis Tribble's book, Texts of Terror, and she has written this about Hagar. As a symbol of the oppressed, Hagar becomes many things to many people. Most especially, all sorts of rejected women find their stories in her. She is the faithful maid exploited, the black woman used by the male and abused by the female of the ruling class, the surrogate mother, the resident alien without legal recourse, the other woman, the runaway youth, the religious fleeing from affliction, the pregnant young woman alone, the expelled wife, the divorced mother with child, the shopping bag lady carrying bread and water, the homeless woman, the indigent relying upon handouts from the power structures, the welfare mother, and the self-effacing female whose own identity shrinks in service to others. So when we are looking at Hagar, she has actually become a symbol for various people groups of those who have been oppressed, but those who also then we want to give a voice to. Somebody whose story we want to hear and respect. So moving on then, starting off with the story of Genesis 16, we are going to do like this. We are going to do it like this. Now, I will read to us the first 4 verses and then I'll go on to what's on the slide. So this is how the story in Genesis 16 starts. Now Sarai, she hasn't been given a new name yet, Abraham's wife, he also doesn't have a new name yet, had borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarah said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. Right, we'll start from there. Now the background to this story is the fact that God has already given Abraham a promise. In Genesis 12, God gives him a promise, "Oh, you'll be father of many nations," or whatever the wording is. But there is no child has yet turned up. So when we get to Genesis 15, just before this, Abraham is a bit like, who is going to be my heir? And he actually makes a suggestion of this guy Eliezer, who we assume was probably a slave living in his household. Before that, we had Lot. We all remember Lot. Lot had come with Abraham on his original journey, but then Abraham and Lot eventually separate. So all of these kind of other options of who the heir could be seems to be taken out bit by bit. It can't be Lot, he's skedaddled away. It's not going to be Eliezer. God tells Abraham that this is going to be, and I quote, "Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man," so Eliezer in this case, "will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." Note, Sarah isn't mentioned here. This is going to be a son of Abraham's flesh and blood. So, is it possible then that, okay, it's not Lot, it's not Eliezer, could it be a son, another son at some point? No, this way. I will make this work. Now, the story starts with this lovely phrase. Sarai bore him no children, but, yay, I have a solution. I can so see this in the kind of, cartoons. You get this character with this light bulb. And one scholar, Arnold, has suggested that could be what's happening here. So Sarah hasn't yet had a child, but she has a possible solution. She had an Egyptian slave girl. And what seems to be the idea here is that this Egyptian slave girl, whose name is Hagar, she's an easy solution. So we haven't had for 10 years, 10 years, note it's actually mentioned in the text, they have been living in Canaan for 10 years, no kids. So it is just possible that this is one of those good ideas. I mean, has anyone ever had a good idea? But anyway, here we have an easy solution. God's taking too long, so we are just going to sort this out ourselves. Now, this is where it gets a bit tricky, and especially in kind of our contemporary context, this might be a bit like, this wasn't really such a good idea. But let's just look at it from the ancient Near Eastern point of view. So this comes from Wenham. He says that to provide a slave girl for the purposes of progeny was a regular feature in the ancient Near East. However, richer wives may have preferred surrogate motherhood. So when it comes to this idea that you don't have children, now today we might be of several opinions about that, but in the ancient Near East this was bad. Because there is no pension system, there is no the state will look after you. The survival of your family name, of you yourself when you are old depends on the fact that there are children to look after you at a later point. So if, for example, the wife of a man was barren, he was well within his rights to take a second wife or get a concubine for the purposes of just producing children. Now, the problem with that, however, is that if you are in this household, and let's say that your husband takes a second wife, they have certain rights and privileges that now you have to contend with. I mean, Rachel and Leah, ring any bells here? It wasn't exactly a very harmonious situation. Now, can I just say one thing? Whenever in the Bible men take more than one wife, it never goes well. Just a kind of general principle here, just thought I'd throw that in for free. But anyway, so what was then possible is this idea of surrogate motherhood. Now, this comes from Tikva Frey-Mckinski, nice and easy name there, brilliant Old Testament scholar, passed away sadly a couple of years ago. But she writes this about surrogate motherhood. And she says that it was once a regular feature in family relations, even if it wasn't particularly common. And, now here we go, the best known example of surrogacy is the laws of Hammurabi. Paragraph 146 concerns the Naditu, a priestess belonging to an order of women who lived together and generally pooled their economic resources. They did not take vows of chastity and could leave the group life and get married, but they were not supposed to have children. So say the laws of Hammurabi, if a man marries an Naditu, she will give her husband a slave girl to have his child. If she does not, he can take a second wife. Since any second wife would quite likely be a rival to the first wife and even displace her, a woman would prefer to give her husband her own slave as a concubine to forestall such a marriage. So that seems to be what's happening here with Sarah, Hagar, and Abraham. At the time, if we assume that something like this was in evidence at the time, this was an actually culturally acceptable solution, whatever we might make of it right now. So you could give your slave girl to your husband for the purpose of having children. They would bear this child, and they would in some way then become the first wives, in a way that you couldn't have that if the husband just took a second wife. So one possible way of reading this story is, like Arnold said here, that we should probably assume that Sarah was obligated, well, we can debate on that, was obligated to provide for Abraham in this way. And none of the characters in the story so far are to be indicted for less than noble behavior. We'll come back to that in a moment, shall we just say. But one of the things that I do want us to take into account is the cultural context of the day. I mean, what are the practices now that for us are commonplace, that in 100 years' time they'll look at us and say, oh, the baby is horrible. Is this one of those? Or is there something actually going wrong here? Because Arnold is very generous in his interpretation, shall we just say that not everybody else is? So, one other possible way of reading this story is that Sarah giving her slave to Abraham was in fact a mistake. So Genesis 15:4, the passage that I just read, because of the context of it being covenant that God is speaking, you could argue that it indicates that God's going to do something. You know, Sarah, Abraham, none of you need to get involved in this plan. God is going to do something. Whereas Sarah's suggestion is a very human one. You could very easily make the argument that Sarah has had enough of this waiting game and is basically maybe thinking, because of her cultural context, and maybe we misunderstood. Maybe this is a way God is meaning for us to provide, so she does what she thinks might be necessary. But even so, it could still have been a mistake. Now, 10 years in Canaan, as I said, could it be a reference to unbelief? The kind of thing that, oh, God gave this promise, but I can't be bothered to wait anymore. I mean, If you've got patience like me, like non-existent, then I would have probably had, well, I don't know, how much time shall I give myself? 3 months? So, 10 years is a fairly significant patient time, but even so, could this be a sign of unbelief? And some scholars have noted that there are suggestions and allusions in this passage back to Genesis 3. Now, you'll get 10 points from the Old Testament scholar if you can tell me what happens in Genesis 3. Yay! Well done! Whoever said that, 10 points. But yes, it is the story of the fall. So Adam and Eve eat of this lovely fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and we get the so-called fall. Now, there are phrases that might just link this story with the fall. So one is the phrase that when, and I haven't read this yet, this comes later on in the passage, but that Abraham listened to the voice. Oh, no, it has already happened in 16:2. Yes, I think my NIV just translated it slightly different. Oh yeah, it just says Abraham agreed to what Sarah said. The phraseology in Hebrew was to listen to the voice. And listening to the voice of Sarah doesn't mean here now that all men, you should just not listen to your wives. It is a reference to the fact that he heard it and obeyed it regardless whether it was a good or a bad idea. So this phrase is being used here, the same as Adam is being blamed because you listened to the voice of Eve and did blah blah blah. Then the same idea could be here. And some of the other phrases are very similar. Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar and gave her to Abraham, her husband. And going to the story of the fall, the woman or wife, the word is same in Hebrew, took the mango, apple, grapes, whatever it was, and gave it to her husband. So is it just possible that in this story, rather than being all nice and generous, as our notes would have us be, this is actually another account of a fall. I don't mean the fall, but rather this is a story of a human error. Now, I haven't even gone to yet what this human error is going to do to Hagar. That will come next. But for now, let's just stop here. Here we have two artistic impressions. One is the story of the fall, and the other one is the story of Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar. And I would just like you to turn to people next to you or online. Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat. Is the story of Sarah and Hagar a story of a fall, in other words, human disobedience? Is our notes right that nobody has yet sinned? It's all fine. They are doing what this culture expected. Or is this a story of a human disobedience already at this point? Okay, couple of minutes, talk with the people around you, put your thoughts in the chat. What do you think? But first, from the room, would anybody want to volunteer ideas, thoughts? Is this a story of human disobedience at this point, yes or no? What do we think? Yes? I'm hearing yeses, 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 yeses. Why?
Because if the cultural thing were the case,
Yeah.
why did they wait so long?
That is a very good point. Since that option would have been available 10 years ago, then why not just snap it up then? Why wait 10 years and do it now? That's a very good point. I like it. I'm going to steal it and and do all of that. Okay, any other ideas?
It's not specific disobedience, because in the fall of Adam and Eve, it said, God says, don't eat that tree.
Definitely, yeah.
It didn't say, don't do something to Hagar.
Yeah, so that is one of the things that is different about these stories, is that in the Genesis 3 fall, it's a definite command. On this one, God kind of has left out some details, shall we say, that then the human beings are happy to fill in however they see fit. Good, okay?
I'm going to cheat a bit, say, I'm not sure. I know,
Yeah.
I read the story, so I know that something goes wrong, but, is this the point that's gone wrong? And
Yeah.
I'm trying to work out, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, which is a beautiful point. See, this is what I'm paid to do, confuse everyone. I'm really good at that. But yes, what is interesting about this story is that I've got two very well-respected scholars here saying two completely opposite things about this passage. And I think a lot of that depends how much weight you give to the cultural background, to the weight. Is this okay now or is it not? And regardless whether it's okay or not, even if the culture allows it, should you still do it? So, what about online, Dan? Have you got any ideas?
Yeah, we've got one comment from
Yeah.
David. It's a story of not waiting, being impatient.
Yeah.
Is we need to wait and keep trusting him.
Ah, yes. So kind of coming back to what you were saying there, this was, what if this was a legit option, why wait? And then like, ooh, I have this option. So yeah, it is a tricky one. And the two scholars here are of differing opinions here. I'm not going to tell you what I think, I will leave that till the end, so let's see. But, the one thing that I will just park on for a minute. Dan, am I allowed to move or do I disappear from view?
No, you do what you want.
Yay! That was a very dangerous thing to say. But one of the things that I just want to park on for a little bit in this, you may love it or hate it, this artistic impression here, is the fact that whether their culture or our culture allows for something like this, the one thing I need to underline here is that in this party, this one, Hagar, she's white by the way. Anyway, another class. Hagar has no say. So this is not what we would nowadays call consensual sex. She hasn't got a choice in this matter. So I remember, I've been teaching Old Testament now since 2013, and I even started before that. And I was at a conference in Sheffield that was looking at kind of gender studies, women in the Bible, all this sort of stuff. And a lady there, who then became a friend of mine after, was speaking on this passage. And I remember being completely floored when she all of a sudden said that this was rape. And see, I had never even thought of that, because it's kind of, well, slaves don't have any will of their own, it's Abraham, how bad can it be? So somehow I had never seen this story as a story of abuse, but that is what it is. One of my, my PhD supervisor, Earl Davies, I remember him writing about the conquest of Canaan and all the killing that happens in those stories. And one of the things that he said in one of his books is that, well, just because it happened a long time ago and it was okay then doesn't make it right, sort of thing. Now, we can be of whatever opinion we want to be of the conquest of Canaan, but it illustrates the point. Just because the culture allows it doesn't make it right. Or are we being too harsh? Well, whichever it is, the one thing that remains is that she didn't have a choice. She didn't have a choice. I somehow doubt she would be there like, yay, I can have Abraham's child, pick me! That is not a scenario I really see here. So the one thing that is definitely certain here was that she didn't have a choice. Now, if we move on from there then, we are now in Genesis 16 verses 4 to 6. So, here we are. When she knew, so she here is Hagar, when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarah said to Abraham, "You are responsible." Just blame your husband. You know, it's just anyway. "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Ooh. "Your slave is in your hands," Abraham said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarah ill-treated Hagar, so she fled from her. Now, what is going on in this story? So at this point, Hagar is pregnant, and we read this phrase, "She looked down on her mistress." And now I need my glasses because I cannot see anything. Oh, there they are. I cannot see anything. Yeah, there we are. Ah, that's better. So, what is going on here? In the Hebrew, this phrase reads something along the lines, "Then her mistress became despised in her eyes." So scholars have read this phrase in a couple of different ways. One is quite a traditional one, that basically Hagar is like, "I'm pregnant, you are not, I'm pregnant, you are not, na, 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 na." So Hagar might have become proud. Maybe she even had feelings of superiority. You know, you might be the first, why not? I'm the one who has the child. But, oh, sorry, I'm just going back to that. That is one possible way of looking at it. And when it comes to Sarah's expression or how she experiences it, she perceives the way Hagar is treating her as violence. Hamas here is the word here that is used. So Sarah perceives this as violence, but what actually is going on? Okay, I'm not going to make you raise your hands, but has anyone seen The Handmaid's Tale? Yeah. So one of the things that this kind of dystopian novel does do quite well is illustrate the kinds of conflicts that can exist in a household between the husband and the women there when one is pregnant and the other isn't. It's not quite as straightforward as, "Yay, we're going to have a child, well done us." But there actually can be a lot of conflict, a lot of tension in there. So yes, it is possible that she became proud, but it is also possible that when it comes to Hagar, and this comes from Phyllis Tribble, she just suggests that Hagar had a new vision of Sarah where hierarchical boundaries disappeared. She thought, "I'm a person, I'm valuable." She has become, in some sense, equal with Sarah, but she will not have it. So it could be that rather than Sarah being up here and Hagar being down there, Hagar, now that she's pregnant, she's like, "Oh, I'm a human, I'm valuable." There is actually, that entire sentence we can talk all day long about, but in her kind of thinking, maybe her value has been raised, but Sarah won't have it. Because now the slave woman is having her thoughts above her station. And Renita Weems, who is a very famous black scholar, one of the things that she has noted here is that it could also be that this looking down is purely in Sarah's head. Because now she is the one who doesn't have the baby. So something that we also see in The Handmaid's Tale is this kind of jealousy that then can come from the woman who is not pregnant. But regardless whose fault this is, Sarah understands it as violence done against her and goes and talks to her husband. I just find this one of those, in a story that is this dark, I find it slightly amusing that it was her idea, but she goes to her husband and then they say, "You are responsible." Everything is now the husband's fault. Eve, in the story of Genesis 3, it's all Eve's fault, now it's all Abraham's fault. So I guess we are very good at blame shifting whichever way around we want to go. But what is going on here then is that Sarah goes and complains to Abraham. Now, is it possible that, as the patriarch, as the head of the household in those days, he has basically let this bickering between these two women just go on and on and on, and he's just like, "I don't care, you sort it out." So he actually in some way has caused the situation. He hasn't established any rules or anything, so maybe Sarah is right in saying you are responsible. On the other hand, maybe Abraham is trying to solve a conflict here. I mean, let's say that Sarah then has come to Abraham and then he responds with a solution. It's not a very good one, but he does give a solution. Your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best or whatever is good in your eyes. Those of you who have studied Judges know that when people do what's good in their eyes, everything goes to hell in a handbasket. But that is his solution here, and it could actually be that Abraham is trying to mollify Sarah here a bit. You know, you are the first wife, you know, if she's in your power, I'm raising your status here. But the sad thing is that if we again go to the ancient Near Eastern context, the laws of Hammurabi and some of the other cultural contracts we have from that time do indicate that if a slave wife got a bit uppity, shall we say, that if she hadn't had children yet, the wife could actually demote her back to just a standard slave. So it could also be here, is that Abraham is basically saying, well, you sort it out, you've got the power, you deal with this. And so Sarah does deal with it. But how does she deal with it? Sarah mistreated Hagar, so she fled. Now, there are two verbs that are really important here in this passage. And some of you are going to say, ooh, or not. But when it talks about mistreatment, this is the same Hebrew root that is used of the mistreatment of the Israelites by the Egyptians in the book of Exodus. So, that is what Sarah is doing to Hagar, that mistreatment. So what does Hagar do? She flees from her. That verb to flee is the same word that is used of the Israelites getting out of Egypt. So here is a definite call now here to the story of Exodus. This is like Exodus upside down. It is not a nation, it's a single person, and the roles have been reversed. This is the Israelite mistreating the Egyptian, and she has decided to flee. And this is where I just want to stop for 1 minute. Because the title of this session was when, okay, I always get it wrong, when good people do bad things. I almost say when bad people do good things, but that's a whole lot. That's another class. But right now, when good people do bad things, again, we look at what Sarah is doing to Hagar, and we are like, well, she was entitled. I mean, poor woman doesn't have a child. I mean, she just needs a hug and a couple of bunny rabbits, right? This is the kind of mistreatment that the Genesis author is equating with what's going on in Egypt to the Israelites. And this is happening, so to speak, in the church. This is the father of faith and the great matriarch Sarah doing this to a slave girl that has no choice. And that again is something that I think we just kind of gloss over this. It's just like, oh, poor Ishmael, it was a mistake. Everybody can make a mistake. Let's just move on, shall we? Really? I mean, when was the last time you took a slave girl and raped her and had a child and called it a mistake? I mean, this is quite a big deal, what is going on here, and it's happening in the family of faith. And just as a sideline, I'm just going to throw in here, one of the things that I do outside of Cliff is that I volunteer with an organisation called Worth. Women on the Road to Healing is a charity in Chesterfield that was started by a previous student of ours, a lady called Robin Riggins. And they provide aftercare to women who have escaped from domestic abuse. And one of the stories I kind of hear over and over again is that because I work mainly with the women there who have retained their faith and they want to kind of go back into the scriptures have usually been used against them to tell them, you know, I'm the head of the house, so rah, rah, rah. And this is one of the, I'm a nice person. This is one of those passages in the Bible, and Yeah, Dan, feel free to find me later. I have even gone print on some Bible passages that I find so uncomfortable that I would like to just rip them out. And this is one of them, sort of thing. But here we go anyway. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. In other words, she's going home. The road to Shur is the road to Egypt. This girl is going home. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back. And this is where go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord, who spoke to her, you are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Beer-lahai-roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram's son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Now, the reason why I would kind of love to kind of just go, or rewrite it, you know, we have the authorized Kirsi version here, is the reason that a lot of the times when we as churches deal with, and I'm talking about women who have been through domestic abuse because that's the context I practice. By that I do not mean that men or other genders cannot be oppressed, that's just my context. But a lot of the time, the church's advice has been, go back to your husband, submit to him, pray for him, he's just going through a hard time. And this is why this passage can be so hard. Because like, if her oppression is similar to Israelites in Egypt, then yeah, just fill in the blanks however you would like. But, so this is why, for me, personally at least, this is a hard passage. And scholars have tried to answer this in a couple of different ways. Now, Hagar is told to go back and submit under the hand of Sarah. And sadly, the verb submit here is just a slightly different form of the word for the oppression anah that was used of Sarah's mistreatment. So there is no, you know, oh, go back to her and she'll just give you a hug. There is none of that in here. She's going back to what she left behind. And so how on earth are we meant to read this then? Now, according to ancient Near Eastern laws, a runaway slave must be returned. However, Deuteronomy, interestingly, seems to at least indicate that runaway slaves should be assisted. So, why? Just tell me, why is she told to go back? Well, option number one. When it comes to her, she is a runaway slave. Where is she going to go? She can't exactly go knock next door and say, hi, I'm a runaway slave, will you please look after me? Egypt is, far away, especially since she seems to be walking. So is it just possible that she is, well, the pregnant slave girl, she's in the wilderness, and for her own safety, she needs to go home? Maybe even the promises, some of them that are given here by the angel, maybe they are linked to her being part of Abraham's household. It's very possible. And here I sadly hear the story of a lot of the women that I have worked with, is that the one phrase that I absolutely hate that is often asked of abused women is, well, why don't you just leave? But if you look at the stats, the most dangerous time for an abused woman to leave is when she is leaving. That is the most dangerous time of all. Often there are financial implications, there are children involved, there is all sorts of other things. It's not that simple. So is it that for some reason then her security was still in Abraham's household? Whatever we might want to think of that. Now, Here is one from Avraham Kirsi, who I referred to earlier, and she says this, that this story is parallel to the Exodus. As the Israelites needed to suffer, so did Hagar prior to redemption. And now note that in Genesis 15, when God makes a covenant with Abraham, he also notes that Israelites will be oppressed while they are in Egypt. We are never told why. This is a question I sometimes get asked. Why did the Israelites have to go to slavery so that God could get them out? We are never told why. It's prophesied that mistreatment will happen, but we are never told why. It's a little similar with Hagar. We are not really told why here. So the story of Hagar is an archetype of Israel. She is promised multiple progenies, a lot of kids, but this promise comes together with suffering, and it's a conundrum that is just not solved. And one of the reasons part of me kind of has quite sympathy with this idea is simply to do with the thing that oftentimes when people suffer, whether it's abuse or whether it's sickness or something else, we do not find out why. Like the Israelites never find out why, Hagar doesn't really find out why. We often don't find out why either. So it seems to be part of some bigger mystery to which the Bible just does not provide an answer. Or, how about this? She's meant to overcome evil with good. So this is from the scholar Johanna, I'm going to slaughter her name now, Catanacho. And she writes this: the angel of the Lord said to her, to Hagar, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her. This is not an endorsement of Sarah's oppression, but an encouragement to transform a situation by changing expectations and strategy." Hagar is informed to adopt the same strategy, advocating the Sermon of the Mount. The victim of injustice is becoming the messenger of God. The oppressed is responding to violence by opening the channels of dialogue. Hagar is called to resist evil with good. I'll just move on. Last one. This comes from Renita Weems. Renita Weems has made quite an interesting case, and this particular picture is not linked to her text, but it describes exactly what she talks about. She says nothing whatsoever. Where are you? Ah, here you are. Hagar's body was free, but her mind remained in bonds. What Sarai thought of Hagar had become what Hagar thought of herself. She was property. Could it be that the angel had no other choice but to send the runaway slave back to the reality in which she had defined herself? The Egyptian woman was part free and part slave. She had fled, signaling her desire to be free, yet she had to return to her mistress's house because she continued to see herself as a slave. Therefore, the angel commanded her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." Hagar's blessing was within her reach, but beyond her grasp. So in other words, she was enslaved in her mind, and that is why the angel sent her back. Now, I'm going to shut up for a minute, praise the Lord, and I am going to ask you now to have a bit of a chat. So online, feel free to put your thoughts in the chat here. I would like you to just talk with the people around you. Do any of these reasons for you adequately explain why Hagar is meant to go back? So the first one was the fact that she had nowhere else to go. Her security is Abraham's house. The second one is the fact that she is delivered after she has suffered, for which the Bible doesn't really give a reason as to why this has to be. Is she meant to overcome evil with good? Just have an attitude change. Or is she trapped inside her own mind? Or something else? Feel free to come with another one. Okay, have a little chat, have a little think. let's not even go there. This is too depressing. Right, anybody want to volunteer any thoughts, ideas? Any of these ideas work for us or not?
Yeah, she was still trapped in slave mentality.
Mm-hmm. So, is there a particular reason you prefer this one?
Because it counsels her going back to Abraham's house, because that wasn't a real security. She's going to handle violence, and it's deliverance after reward. It is a bit, it's rubbish.
Fair enough. Absolutely fair enough. Yeah, it is an interesting one. This one, I've only ever read it from Renita Weems, but it does give credence to the fact that oftentimes when it comes to even just our own walk with God, even if we are in the so-called promised land, if our head is still stuck in old patterns, we can't take hold of necessarily everything that we have. So there is absolutely good reason to think that that may well have been at the bottom of it. Thank you. Oh, we got two. Ladies first.
Well, Abraham might have been a bit wet, but in her leaving, she also takes the child with her.
She does indeed, yes. So would you say that that would that go with one, or are we creating a new category?
5.
All right, we have a score in the house. Well done. Write it down, make an argument, become Richard Bates. But yes, I mean, she is taking the child with her. So now Abraham's offspring is literally skedaddling all over the universe here. So could that have been the reason? She's then told to go back? Quite possibly. Number 5. Okay, and at the front?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there might be elements of more than one of those
True.
involved here. It's not necessarily just limited to one of them.
Yeah.
But another factor as well, which we have to remember, is that the angel also gave her a promise as part of it. So she wasn't just going back to the situation that she knew. She went back also with that hope of the promise that the angel had given.
Yes.
I'm not saying it makes it any easier. And there's obviously you've got to bear in mind all that.
Well, yeah, there's something else to
it. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good point. And yeah, these ideas don't necessarily cancel each other out. There could well be several elements in here. And to do with the promise, I'll actually come to that next. But the promise is actually a very powerful one. Not necessarily because, as you said, it's just like, oh, well, it's all okay then. But there is an extra to this story that is sometimes not always emphasized. Right.
I kind of want to just build on what was said. So I was about to say, I kind of agree with that number 5, because she's got the son. We know that there's this promise to the son. It doesn't say, I think often we read the story and think, Isaac's the one with the promise. The promise is that you will have many descendants. The promise sits with Ishmael and Isaac. The promise is still there. So she's taken one of the promises actually to have the promise away. So that comes back. But then, as you say, there is this promise that's given again, another promise on top. And in that sense, the promises actually include promises that we know there's more promises in the Bible in a big view, of deliverance, of opening down the hill. Those of us who were in the session earlier were dipping into Isaiah, and there's the suffering servant, which is a reference here. So there's all these layers, and I think we could not even really scratch the surface. There's more.
Yeah, this is definitely a multiple-layered story, and can I just say that the one reason why I love and hate this story is to do with the fact that she is told to go back, but at the same time, I cannot exactly say I love the fact that she's told to go back, but what I mean is that her experience does reflect a lot of the times the experience of people who are abused or who are ill or whatever, is that there is no great deliverance. It just doesn't happen. So Hagar's story then becomes very multi-layered one, whether it's from the suffering servant or of some like contemporary individual's point of view, is that there can be a lot of this in the mix and more. Well done, my scholar. So, online, any thoughts there?
Yeah, we've got a couple.
Okay.
We've just got one reflecting that Hagar was trapped to the mind, and God showed his faithfulness to Hagar, set her free to be herself.
Yep.
And then we've got one saying, similar again, trapped in a mentality, she didn't know what to do, felt that she had no control.
Yeah.
4 stands out more than the rest, 0.4, but there are hints in the other 3.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so it looks like this this idea of where is my mentality there? That again, how our thoughts can hold us back. We sometimes don't give it enough credit necessarily. Right, now, the last thing, I am actually coming to the end, that we are going to look at is to do with the promise. Because within this promise element is also the point that I want to make about, okay, when good people do bad things, how are we then supposed to respond to injustice? And of course, I could spend the next 3 weeks talking about all sorts of various steps, but the one step I want to make here today is the first thing to do is to see it. Acknowledge that it exists. This entire ending is emphasizing the God who sees. And so let's look at that for now. So Hagar, first of all, she's the only woman in the whole Bible to receive a promise for multiple descendants. She's the only woman who ever gets this promise. And she's one of only a few women, I think there are like what, 2 or 3 others, who receive an annunciation of a birth. So there's an angel that says, "Thou shalt bear a child." So we can think of, who else was there? I did have them listed here in my notes somewhere. So there's Mary, there is... Yes?
That comes from Zechariah, doesn't it?
Okay, there are some women. Let's just leave it at that. Well done, you. But what we get in the story then is that she gets this promise of multiple descendants. She's among a select number of women who get an annunciation of a birth. But, I mean, you could still say the story is still about Abraham. It's his seed. That her story, Genesis 16, is still surrounded by Abraham this and Abraham that. So let's just keep that in mind. But this is the thing that I really want to emphasize now. All of these promises and blessings that are given to Hagar about Ishmael. The name Ishmael literally means God hears. And what is interesting about this name is that when the angel says that you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery, here is that word again, Anna. So what we have here is God's acknowledgement that he has heard of Hagar's suffering. Like he hears the groaning of the Israelites in Egypt, God here recognizes her suffering. And what is then intriguing about this idea that he will be a wild donkey of a man, that might sound a bit like, what on earth is that about? But this is to do with the fact that he will be living in a kind of more nomad lifestyle. And wild donkey, it kind of refers to the liberty of living in wilderness outside of the hierarchical systems of Israel. So he will be a bit of an outlier outsider, but outside of this oppressive system that sometimes Israel had. And so God has heard of her suffering. He acknowledges it. That is the one thing that if you came for nothing else in this seminar, hear that. God has heard the suffering. He's heard the suffering, using the exact words of what have been used so far. And the last thing that then she does, nobody else, and this is where I sometimes start to cry, apologize if I do, she's the only person in the Bible who gives God a name. God names himself, or people name places based on God's activity. Nobody ever gives God a name. This is the only time, and it is an abused, runaway Egyptian slave girl. And she gives God a name, El Roi, the God who sees me. So that in her experience, whether we want to say that she should have gone back or not, her experience was the fact that God saw her. And he saw her suffering, he saw what it did to her, he saw it all. yes, she goes back. But we also have an acknowledgement of the fact that God has heard and God sees. So where I would kind of want to finish this seminar is that, okay, when good people do bad things, what can we do? See. Don't just assume that because we are the church that it doesn't happen. Or because she's the pastor, she couldn't possibly. Or he's the youth leader, he couldn't necessarily. No, no. Sorry. It happens in the church.
Yeah.
It happened in the church, so to speak. So if nothing else that we can do, let's do what God did. Be the God who sees the suffering. So my last slide here is to do with, because my background is working in domestic abuse. Refuge has a really good website. And it has anything and everything to, if you are being abused yourself or if you're supporting someone, steps, what to do and all the rest of it. This is an excellent place to start, and they also have a helpline. But if nothing else, let's be the church that sees. So let's just pray, because I think we need it. There, ready? And let's go from here. Lord, we want to thank you for your word, that even if we don't always understand what's going on, you are still speaking. You are the God who sees. You are the God who has heard the suffering. You are the one who understands the suffering. You are the one who became the suffering for all of us. So Lord, as the church, help us to see with the eyes that you see, who see the suffering, rather than turn away from it or try to impose our own agenda to it. Lord, help us to be the church that sees, because you are the God who sees. Amen. Thank you, everybody. Go and do something uplifting now. Bunnies, if you can find them. Sheep, is there sun? I don't know. But just do something uplifting for your own sake.